Nationalizing now. Oh, here we go. So, straight off the bat, this is our guest. This is Pastor Brandon Holthaus, who I had the pleasure of meeting last September when he was on tour with the other guys
Yeah.
all the way around Europe. And he came to Portadown here in Northern Ireland. And Pastor Brandon's background, he is the lead pastor at Rock Harbour Church. He is a professor of eschatology at Summit Bible College. He has a Master of Divinity from Liberty University Baptist Theological Seminary and a Master of Arts in religion degree. He has also got a bachelor's degree in political science from Columbia University. So he is well educated, well versed, a biblical scholar, and a great teacher of the word. And pleasure to be connected with you simply from the fact that when I got to meet you and we had that discussion in Portadown, it was so refreshing to hear the same things that we're dealing with here that
Yeah.
you're dealing with in your neck of the woods. And I want to ask you a question straight off the bat.
Okay.
And I guess it's sort of based on different things that we're seeing right now. Um, One of the things that we had a discussion with was the rainbow sort of agenda.
Yeah.
We talked about that. But do
Yeah.
you think the combination of, I guess, the world's loosening belief in maybe special creation and the growth of transhumanism and the days of Noah of Matthew 24:37, do you think this is all what we're seeing right now?
I think yes is the short answer, and the reason is because what I'm noticing, this is not a regional thing. When we talk about the days of Noah, it was a global thing that was happening in the days of Noah, and that's important for us to understand. And so people say, Gary, you have these people, even Christians, that are naysayers saying, we've always had evil. There's nothing different that's going on. And it's like, wait a second, time out. We are seeing things we have never seen in human history. Transgenderism, transhumanism. What are you talking about? The only time we ever saw something like that was in Genesis 6. And so this stuff is unprecedented. And let me give you the other aspect that it's unprecedented. Even if we talk about the days of Lot, as Jesus warned about, he said that the last days would be like the days of Lot and the days of Noah. Well, we know what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and we understand it was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, five towns, a region where this outbreak of homosexuality, lesbianism, whatever sexual deviancy that was there. Um, so it was localized. But the problem is now, as I've traveled the world, and anybody that understands the news, the whole rainbow agenda, LGBTQ plus X, Y, and Z, this, that, whatever, is global now, Gary. It's global. So it's not a regional thing. And that's when we know we're at the level of the days of Noah when you see the correlation that it's not just an American phenomenon. There's no doubt America has been the primary pusher of this. There's no doubt about that. I get that. America is to blame for exporting this through the social media and through all the other media outlets and entertainment outlets and music outlets that we have. But it's global now. It is global. They're handling it. You guys are handling it in Ireland. We're handling it here. I've seen it in Australia. It's in Mexico. It's in Brazil. It's everywhere. Everybody I talk to all over the globe is saying we're being bombarded by this. And it's not just in the society, Gary, it's in the churches now. And so the stats in the churches are horrible. So, for instance, in the United States, I think it's like 52 to 54% of those who claim to be Christian say that gay marriage is okay. Well, that's a problem if 54% of Christendom is saying that. And again, everyone's going to make the argument. Well, that's those are tares among the wheat, which is true. That's Laodicea. That's all that. But we have never been at that stat in history where the majority of those who claim to be Christians say that this is okay. So the word I would use is it's unprecedented,
Hmm.
and that's how we know we're in the days of Noah.
And when you see that sort of rhetoric, I guess, magnified from the Vatican and the blessing of same-sex
Yeah,
partnerships or unions, and that sort of dumbfounded me, because if you even went back maybe a year before, the Vatican had came out and said that they cannot bless sin. And if you follow the logic there, then obviously they're now not equating that to sin.
yeah.
And do you think this then, to take this further, do you think this is all sort of related back to, you know, Darwinism, the sort of attack upon special creation, the idea that if you're not specially formed, if you're not created with a purpose from God and you're just a clump of cells, then
Yeah.
you can determine your own outcome and you can be, it kind of falls into the Alistair Crowley, do what thou wilt, that
Yeah.
sort of rhetoric. Do you
Yeah.
think it's sort of rooted then in, because that's permeated the classrooms,
Oh,
Darwinism?
yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that's a major contributing factor to this mindset. I mean, if you're told you're a monkey's uncle and
Yeah.
that you crawled out of the primordial soup, well, then you don't have meaning in life. You're just a
Mhm.
blob of tissue that got put together. There's nothing that extends beyond this. So basically, what people have been told is that you determine your own meaning in life. Then you determine your own identity, because there's no God in their mindset, and so you determine your own reality. And now the thing is, that's exactly what Satan told Adam and Eve in many
Yeah.
regards, that basically you become your own God at that point in time. So Darwinian evolution has a spiritual component to it, to where the person becomes the determiner of right and wrong. That's what Satan's temptation was, obviously.
Mhm.
And so Darwin has led into that. And then, obviously, we know that the public schools and the colleges, universities have brainwashed our younger generations into this thinking.
Mhm.
And so, if you follow Romans 1 and you decide that you're not going to worship the creator, but rather the creation,
Mhm.
and self worship is creation worship,
Yeah.
I already know what'll happen to your mind, because all I have to do is read Romans 1. Your mind will become darkened, depraved, and basically, the word that we can use in Greek is moron, that
Mhm.
you actually make yourself a moron
Yeah.
by worshiping the creation. And that's where you're starting to see it's going beyond gay marriage. It's transgenderism. It's all these weird things. And I tell you what, Gary, the next thing that's following on the heels of the transgender movement is the pedophile movement. Because here in America, they're making the same arguments that the homosexual or the transgender, saying, look, if I have a right to determine my identity and I was born this way, or whatever, these pedophiles are saying I was born this way, so you don't have a right to criticize me.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that's the new frontier that it's going into, is legalized pedophilia. They're already heading that direction. So you're totally right about where it starts, and with the Darwinian evolution, I become my own God. But where it ends is damaging children.
Mhm.
And then the transgender movement, I mean, think about the butchery that it's doing now, and the doctors are making money hand over fist by changing someone's identity and cutting parts off of them and saying, okay, now you're a girl, now you're a guy. It's
Yeah.
very demonic, no doubt about that. But yeah, its origins start with the person not knowing where they come from, not knowing who they are, and not knowing where they're going. And
Mhm.
that's the essence of meaning in life, which we derive from God. And if you don't have that,
Yeah.
you lose your mind. You really do.
And if you take God out of the equation, if you go down the Nietzsche route, that God is dead, and then
Yeah.
therefore you don't need a creator, then the next logical consequence is fear of the Lord goes. And if fear of the Lord goes, and I'm talking probably specifically for the church, then if fear of the Lord is gone from the church as well, then the church starts to make itself in its own image. And I think that's, you know, you talked about Romans 1 and the worshipping of creation, like Gaia worship, worship of the
Yeah.
earth. We're seeing that not only creep into the church, but actually, I guess, become a massive part of it. You know, we had the climate commandments on Mount Sinai. We had, you know,
Yeah.
the rhetoric that's come out from the Vatican, but we've also had evangelical churches that have had climate services.
Yeah.
And it kind of, to me, it should be alarm bells ringing for everyone who is confessing the name of Christ that we are at this sort of we're at this sign on the road, we're at this marker. And I don't know, are you seeing an awful lot? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, that the climate tends to get pushed in here, that it tends to be going in the route of Gaia worship?
Absolutely, and you know, whether you want to call it wokeism or cultural Marxism, it has infiltrated the church, and there's no doubt there's a majority of the population in the church here in America, and then also in Australia and New Zealand. What I saw, just coming back from my speaking thing that I was doing, that they give it the term creation care, and they give it the term we need to be good stewards of the creation in order to sell Gaia worship,
Yeah.
because that's really what it is. And what's ended up happening is the wokeism, which is nothing but the infiltration of cultural Marxism, has got into the church. And
Hmm.
and so whether we're talking about race, sexuality, or now climate care, it's all a Marxist tactic. And so anyway, what I'm seeing is, so you got these churches in America now that are putting it under the veneer of creation care, but what they're really doing is elevating the worship of creation above man, where man is not the steward, man is not to have dominion, man is equal with like a bear or a deer
Hmm.
or a dog, and that the creation trumps us, and we've got to support the creation by our sustainable development,
Hmm.
our sustainable goals that the UN gives us, and so we now are watching this happen, and I can and it's the church is pushing it. Now I can tell you, Gary, what's going to get ready to happen, and you already know this, but for your audience, the attack on food with this creation care is a big deal,
Yeah.
and people need to understand what's happening with this. So they're gonna tell you, because they're already saying this. We need to be good stewards of the earth. Therefore, we need to we reduce our meat consumption,
Hmm.
and we need to reduce our farming, because what they're saying is ridiculous, that 30% of farming is producing no, sorry, farming is producing 30% of greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
So I was just in New Zealand, where number one industry is farming, and they're eliminating their cattle and their sheep and whatnot because they're saying it's too much methane causing greenhouse gases. So these farmers are going out of business. Well, what happens is you start having a lack of animal protein now, and they're wanting to feed people insects,
Hmm.
which I can tell you what's going to happen. They're telling you, in order to save the planet, we have to reduce our meat consumption, which is going to be devastating to third world countries and second world countries, and will cause mass starvation. And on top of that, it's not just meat, it's rice production as well. So
Yeah.
what's going to get ready to happen? And you know this, Gary, and this is for your audience. Paul predicted that in the last days certain things would come, and he says one of the things that are going to come is that the church will tell you to stop, or start telling you to forbid the eating of certain foods. And I
Hmm.
think the King James translates it as meats,
Yeah.
but but we're there, and I'm just waiting for the next wave of these false pastors, these hirelings, to start telling the congregation to stop eating meat, because that's coming,
Hmm.
and, because that's the mantra of the World Economic
Yeah.
Forum and all the globalists. So it's alive and well, and people need to be prepared for this.
Well, if I, like, we've taught on this. So as soon as you mentioned C40 or 15-minute cities, and you
Yeah.
actually show the requirements that they're trying to drop. They're trying to eradicate meat consumption, but they're saying to drop you to 60 grams.
Yeah.
Um, all of this, even if you take that out of the natural diet, it makes, on our physiology, it makes us more passive and more pliable. And that seems to be what they're looking for. And
Yeah.
when we look at the term that a lot of people thought came from Biden, and it didn't, it came from the World Economic Forum, build back better. Do you
Yes.
think, um, I remember William Federer, the historian,
Yeah.
termed Machiavellianism as the description of someone going round the back of a house starting a fire and coming round the front and trying to sell you a fire extinguisher.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that
Good point.
seems to be what Build Back Better is based on, the idea that they create catastrophes and then they come along and say, well, for the price of your peace and safety, we can supply you this. Is that something that you would agree with or something you would view?
Oh, absolutely, man. It's classic rules for radicals. Never let a crisis go to waste. And they're the ones who actually cause the crisis if people can see what they're doing. And so, one of the big things I've been speaking about is the green agenda. I
Yeah.
call it the green dragon because it's affecting the choke points of any society. So, for instance, if you choke point the society at the fossil fuel level, which is the energy
Mhm.
level, you're going to tank their economy. You're going to tank the whole
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
like Sri Lanka and the other ones that wanted to follow everything that the World Economic Forum wanted. So you hit fossil fuels, you hit energy. The second thing is you hit food production, basically
Mhm.
farming, which they're attacking right now. Right, that's a chokehold, and you can control them. And the third one's the economy.
Mhm.
And if you can control their economy, which they're doing through the green agenda by saying, look, we're going to have ESG scores, we're going to have DIE scores, social credit scores, and whatnot. You've got to show us that
Yeah.
you're trying to save the planet, you're diverse, and whatever, all that junk. Um, that will destroy your economy. And so people need to take a step back and realize this is not about saving the planet. This is not about creation care. This is about taking control of every government on the planet for a
Mhm.
global government. And so what they have to do then, Gary, because here's the thing, no one buys it.
Yeah.
Okay. So therefore, what they have to do is create a crisis of their own making
Mhm.
so that people will beg for them to rescue them. They
Yeah.
did this with the lockdowns. They did this with the COVID-19. They've done it. They're doing it right now in America with our economy. They are intentionally destroying the free market capitalistic society that we
Mhm.
have for a green economy in order to go to what? A digital currency is what they
Yeah.
want, a
Yeah.
central bank digital currency. So that tactic that you mentioned is alive and well. And I'll take another thing, immigration, as
Mhm.
another example. The United States has allowed a 10 million since the Biden administration has got in 10 million illegal immigrants to come into the United States, and we don't know where they're coming from. As far where they're at, we know they're coming from China. We know they're coming from the Middle East, and they're collapsing our economic system. And they're
Yeah.
and they're saying we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. We'll close the border up, dude.
Mhm.
But why? The reason they're allowing this migration, it is a globalist goal to overwhelm the system, collapse the system, and then eventually go to a regional government with
Yeah.
Mexico, Canada, and America. That's the intention.
Yeah.
And so they have caused a border crisis. And then the fix is this: we can't deal with it just as America. We have to form a regional government in order to handle these mass immigrations, legal or legal, to deal with. And people have to wise up to that. So you're totally right, Gary. That's the tactic.
It's like a throwback to what was sort of published by the Club of Rome, that
Yeah.
idea of splitting up, which is basically the ten horn system or the ten
Yeah.
kingdom system of Revelation. And
Yes.
do you think then that that would relate? Because one of the things that I'm noticing, yes, there's the growth of globalization, But there's also this within governments, but there also seems to be that happening within corporations. You're seeing a monopoly happening with the likes of Google, with the likes of Amazon, Apple, and I think it's called the Magnificent Seven. The idea that these seven are basically sort of in charge of most things now.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening too?
Absolutely. You're hitting the nail on the head. So you're on top of it, Gary. What's happening, and people have to understand what's forming. The global government is not going to be a communistic government. It is
Hmm.
a corporate fascistic globalist system.
Hmm.
And how do I get that? Well, if I read Revelation 17 and 18, it's real simple. The three-legged stool is there. The merchants of the world, the kings
Hmm.
of the world, and the religion of the whore of Babylon. That's the
Yeah.
three-legged stool.
Yeah.
So that tells me right off the bat, it's not going to be communistic. It tells me that there's going to be a what we call now today, what they call it, Gary, a public-private partnership.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what has formed. And now you'll hear those terms coming from the World Economic Forum. You'll hear them at the UN. You'll hear those terms even in the U.S. government. A public partner, private partnership. Now here's what the tactic is, and everyone needs to understand. It is fascism.
Hmm.
Okay, and what's happening? What the government cannot pass legally is that they are doing an end around on the people, on the citizens of Ireland, on England, on the United States, Australia, America, Canada. They're doing an end around through the corporations to push
Yeah.
the religion, the whore's religion,
Hmm.
on the people. And so when you say, I don't agree that Facebook should shadow ban me for what the things I say, well, it's not the government doing it to you, so it's not a legal thing. It's a
Yeah.
private corporation, and they're like, well, if you don't like it, don't use our platform. Oh, so this is the end around through the corporations, and the corporations have bought into this.
Hmm.
Now, at the and this is where people are asking, well, I don't get this. Why would a corporation push ESG like Disney, for instance, and slice their own throats, or
Yeah.
Bud Light, right? That lost billions of
Yeah.
dollars pushing a transgender dude, or for Disney, for instance. Okay, let's just use Disney as an example. Disney sliced its own neck because its primary base is family oriented people
Hmm.
that go to the park and whatnot, and access the movies and
Yeah.
whatnot. But they were willing, Gary, to sacrifice that that money, big money. You're talking billions of dollars for something else, an agenda,
Hmm.
a LGBT agenda, that they were willing to sacrifice that amount of money and that amount of people for this agenda. And people will say, well, that doesn't seem like good business. And it's like, wait, well, you don't understand something. What the governments and the private corporations have all come to terms with is this, that we will sacrifice in the short term for the long term benefits of pushing ESG,
Yeah.
DEI compliancy. Because what's going to happen is Target, Walmart, all these big corporations, Lowe's, Home
Hmm.
Depot, are willing to take a hit now because it's going to put all out of business all their competitors. There will
Yeah.
be no more mom and pop competitors.
Yeah.
And what they are promised is a monopoly in their area by the government. And if they get that monopoly, then they're willing to push the governmental agenda through the private sector in
Hmm.
their corporations rather than the government having to pass any laws. Now, if people can understand that, that is where we're going on the global level with this private public partnership. And Gary, it's in Europe. It's
Yeah.
it's Australia. They're already doing it. So people need to be aware of that.
We have just had now. There's north and south up here where we are, but the south of Ireland have came out with a new law based on hate speech online, and like you say, it's being put in the hands of the providers, but the hate speech is being deemed against protected people,
Yeah.
protected classes, and protected groupings. And
Yeah.
you know what's ridiculous about it is they done a survey, they sent it out to the population. 70% of the population rejected it, said they do not want this. And the government go, well, yeah, that's still good figures for us. 30% is fine. Let's go ahead and initiate this. And then you've got things like the online safety bill already in action in the UK, where it kind of does the same thing,
Yeah.
where they have trigger words, they have different things that if you say them, that's you cancelled, that's offer or whatever. And it seems to me that maybe it's thinly veiled, or maybe it's something I'm looking at, and I think that this is directed primarily at the church. Because if I read the word as the word is, and I don't try and superimpose it with the spirit of the age and update it to be relevant, I'm apparently engaged in hate speech. And do you think
Yeah.
that this is a demonic, satanic agenda against the word of God?
Absolutely. And think about this. I mean, why, Gary, are these government entities or corporations so afraid of truth?
Yeah,
Because they have a false narrative that they're pushing. And so guys like you, myself, and the others that are getting the truth out, they have to deem it as hate speech. Now think about this, Gary. In January, the World Economic Forum got together in their annual meetings in Davos. And, if people don't think that the elites get together to try to figure out how to rule the world, they do. Every year they do this. And the number one threat that they said, for the first time I've ever heard them do this, was misinformation and disinformation, and you can include hate speech in that as well.
yeah,
And you realize that usually they've had global warming hoax as the number one threat, but this year it was that. It was hate speech. Sorry, disinformation, misinformation. You think why? Well, something's happening this year. It's never happened in human history. About 40% of the world population is voting, especially in the Western society,
yeah,
and they do not want truth coming out about what's happening in the world with candidates, with policies, and things of that nature. And you and I, Gary, are the main target of that because you and I are speaking the truth on a spiritual level. So they have to deem it as hate speech, disinformation, and misinformation. Now, the new tactic that I just have realized, they've been doing this for some time, but now the new thing in America, and I don't know so much that you're getting it there, but maybe you can speak to this, but they're calling us Christian nationalists.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And that these Christian nationalists that think about this, they said believe in that their rights come from God. Yeah, that's what our founding documents say. They're
yeah.
inalienable rights, dude. And they're saying, that these are the kind of people who want Christian values and believe that they came from a Christian society. That these are the spreaders of disinformation and hate speech against the LGBT, whatnot. And I can tell you, Gary, it's a whole setup to silence us.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go digital with a digital currency, you already know what they're going to attach to that. They're going to attach a social credit score to the digital currency. And if the digital currency is programmable, they're going to say, "Hey, look, man, your hate speech that you're saying about the LGBT or whatever, or you're talking about the government or whatever, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to ding you on your social credit score, which is going to hurt you financially. So you
Yeah.
better shut up." And what people don't realize is this system is getting ready to be implemented soon.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to silence us. And this is their tactic to do it through hate speech, disinformation, and misinformation.
Well, we had over in the UK, we had. I know Nigel Farage, his bank and all was stopped. His ability to sort of move money or lift money out, and but
Yeah,
it seems to have, when we talk about how sort of Christianity, I think, is under attack, and you're saying it, Christian nationalists. There's been recent stories in the news over here about preachers on the street being arrested.
yeah.
One was arrested, I think, the other day for preaching, and it was called hate speech, John 3:16.
Oh no.
I don't even
Wow.
know how that can be deemed. I saw another girl who was singing a Christian hymn on the street, and she was stopped by the police, and the police said you can't sing those songs outside of church grounds. And it seems to me that it's very, very evident that there is a target upon those who are bringing the word, who are submitted to the word. It was also told to me recently by someone in church that Davos is the highest elevated town in Europe, and that just straight away made me think Isaiah
Wow.
14, the devil wants to present itself in the highest part of the congregation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I guess, do you think that this is going to be facilitated, specifically the CBDCs and like you say, like a social credit system with artificial intelligence and the way it's progressing? Do you think that's going to allow the mechanism?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all they have to do is set the algorithms, and that rhythm can pick up anything I say or you say on the internet. I mean, forget it. I'm cooked. I mean,
Mhm.
I've already said what I need to say to get enough to be put in jail if they go hate crime.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're totally right. And they're going to run the algorithm through the AI, and really, at the end of the AI thing, it's who's ever programming it, to work for their favorite. This is why I've watched the U.S. government try to get control of the AI,
Mhm.
and get it out of the hands of the private developers. But again, there's probably going to be some type of partnership between government and the private, which we already see on social media,
Mhm.
to be able to run those algorithms to alert them. Now, here in America, how's this going to go? Well, I can speak to this. When they call us Christian nationalists, and they label that these people, want to see a Christian nation, they have Christian values, they're anti-LGBT,
Yeah.
we're getting put on the list of the Department of Homeland Security, Gary,
Wow.
already as a threat to the stability and of the government, and that puts us in the category of an insurrectionist.
Wow.
And this was what people need to understand. You get put into the category of an insurrectionist, you're
Mhm.
going to have the FBI show up at your door and arrest you, and you will disappear, like the January 6th people did. And we have not heard hide or hair of them. And,
Mhm.
and all the legal protections that we saw with those people have just been thrown away. They just disappeared in a jail cell. And this is where people have to not be naive, and it's not a conspiracy theory because they're already doing it, that these are the lengths they're willing to go to stop the truth. And we're going to become like China in the West, where the
Yeah.
scriptures are going to, this book, this Bible, will be a hate crime to even have it, to speak it, and to use it. And that's what has to happen, if for them to continue their narrative about what they're planning on doing.
Mhm.
That being the case, people ask me all the time, well, Brandon, how much am I going to see? I expected to be raptured by now, and I didn't expect this. And I said, look, man, we're only promised to be raptured prior to the tribulation.
Yeah.
If the Lord tarries and raptures us closer, to the start of the tribulation, that means we're going to see more.
Mhm.
We could experience a central bank digital currency. We could experience
Yeah.
going to jail. We could experience, having hate crimes, and that's where I think the body of Christ has to have two narratives. It has to have this narrative. Yes, we can be raptured at any point in time, but I might be persecuted in the West.
Mhm.
We have never seen this before, but Gary, it's starting to happen.
Yeah. Well, I was actually having a conversation with someone from the congregation today about that very thing. They were saying that they can't witness to people. They were previously trying to witness to people in their work, and they were being shut down and given warnings and so on. And I was saying Matthew 10:16, to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. It's now a point of not being quiet and not being pushed into the corner and just being told, right, what you're saying is against the norm and against the spirit of the age. It's about kind of also applying a little bit of wisdom to it.
Yeah,
If you're sitting with a group of people that you know that one minute they're going to turn on you simply because you're confessing the truth, well then you can start a debate, you can start a questioning process there.
Yes.
Do you think, sorry, with the likes of one of the things that probably has concerned me the most recently when it comes to legislation and what is on the in the pipeline is the pandemic preparedness treaty that is
Mhm.
being brought in by the WHO.
Yeah.
And it also sort of, it's like they're preparing for the World Economic Forum's sort of 2024 agenda. It also has taken issue with disinformation,
Yes.
misinformation, and it's such a signing over of sovereign powers. Do you see this as something that the Christian community should be, I guess, rallying against?
Oh man, you hit the nail on the head, man. With the World Health Organization's treaty and the United States plans on signing this in May or April or May, I can't
Yeah.
remember. But we are going to hand off our medical sovereignty to this group, this globalist group. And
Hmm.
you're dead right. Every Christian needs to be totally aware of this and try to resist it as much as possible because look, man, we already saw what they did
Hmm.
to us before, and we had a very few amount of people controlling everybody
Yeah.
and causing deaths and harm and all kinds of things here in America and around the world. So when we do that, and it's coming, and I think there's 143 nations also that are going to sign on that or already have signed on. I can't remember the exact number, but it's over the 100
Hmm.
nations that have already signed on. You got Tedros is going to be telling other countries what to do, which is a form of imperialism, which comes from the Roman Empire, obviously. So now we're seeing the hints of imperialism, which Daniel predicted, a foreign entity telling a sovereign state what to do health wise. And what's going to happen? Okay, so again, you got your preview already of what they already did, so they're just going to double down and do it more. So you have teachers coming out with saying that there's going to be some virus X or whatever he calls it, disease X, and
Hmm.
we're going to have to prepare for that. And you know what's happening? More lockdowns. You're not
Yeah.
going to be able to travel, and this is why I'm traveling a lot right now because I realize my window is going to close at some point in
Hmm.
time because they're going to require me to be vaccinated, and I'm not about to do that.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna put us in these 15-minute cities. You're not going to travel unnecessarily and flying planes, all this other stuff to take away our freedom. And so they have figured out, Gary, that if you go after people on health, then you can take more rights away from them. So
Hmm.
this is another avenue they're doing it. And I think every Christian needs to wake up to this. And here's the other problem that's going on. If Christians don't speak out and push back, their silence is going to allow this to happen.
Yeah.
And I know there's bigger things that maybe we can't control, but one of the major problems that we saw with the lockdowns and the vaccinations was the complete silence from the church and the compliance with the government over this issue.
Hmm.
And Gary, it wasn't just in Ireland and Scotland and England and America. It was Canada. It was Australia, New Zealand. It was all the Western world that this hit, and everybody I talked to said the same thing. Their coward pastor either wouldn't say anything and just simply bowed down to the government,
Hmm.
stayed locked down for an entire year, would not talk, and then they came back woke after all the lockdowns. So what I have seen, and then now with Israel in October 7th, I have seen the church be silent on that as well, or become
Yeah.
anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Um, Very few will speak in pro-Israel terms, and so I'm watching all this go down, and yet the church is completely silent on
Hmm.
the issue. And so the church is not pushing back, it's not saying no, it's just allowing it to happen. And again, there's exceptions to the rule like yourself and other remnant people, but dude, there's not enough of us, man. The
No.
majority are not doing anything.
Do you not think though that the sort of satanic agenda wise, they have cottoned on to the fact that fear is a powerful tool?
Yeah.
I look at my own dad. My dad passed 2 years ago there. So he passed whilst the pandemic was sort of tailing off, but he wouldn't leave the house,
Mm.
and he had gone into that state where fear had just enveloped him, and then he died of a heart attack. And it was,
Oh boy.
you know, it's hard to get past that when you look at the regulations that were on, and that you couldn't visit and you weren't allowed. And we actually had the police called on my sister, who was his carer, who had to go in and look after him, and just for her turning up in the house. And
Wow.
it kind of makes you think, if that is just a small microcosm of how it was, and it's not like things have improved. The
Right.
laws and the kind of power grab from governments and corporations has just increased. What's it going to be like? How are we? I'm praying that we don't see like so much of it, but at
Yeah.
the
So
same time, it's hard not to. I guess I'll get to my question here. Sorry, the fear element. Do you think the fear element will be intrinsic in creating what would be seen as a state church compared to a biblical church? That idea of compliance that we saw, but probably even more so.
yeah. Oh man, you hit the nail on the head. I actually did a prophecy update last night on the state church,
Oh
the
wow.
rise of the state church. So it's funny that you say that, because that's what's forming the fear factor. Satan has already figured out if you make humans afraid, and humans that don't trust God, and if
Mm.
you notice, the majority of the church, even that believers are really immature in their faith. They
Yeah.
don't have the kind of character and spiritual maturity that their faith can override any fear that comes in their way. So the devil has already figured it out, that if you use fear of death, fear of losing your job, fear of losing your money if you don't
Mm.
comply, it works really well for about 95% of the population.
Mm.
That's what the stats are. And I always refer to Matthias Desmet in his mass psychosis formation, is that 95% of the population will just go with what's going on because of fear,
Mm. Yeah.
and only 5% will resist. And I think that 5% is typically truthers, those who believe the truth and understand things and they are not afraid. But anyway, the manipulation tactic of fear is going to be used again because it works so well,
Hmm.
and no one has learned their lesson about it. And so anyway, it'll be used. And so what is the end result? Well, the end result is if you're able to be manipulated through fear, then they can pretty much get you to do anything, as long as you want to keep your job and your life, your health, or whatever it might be. And so this is where it comes down to the spiritual aspect, where Jesus said, "You must be willing to lose your life in order to gain it."
Hmm.
And that's a simple discipleship principle. But now you see, Gary, how profound that is in a time like ours. And so if they can use fear, they're going to get compliance. And when they get compliance, basically the person turns into a slave. And if you want to become a slave, then fear is the way to get there. So my thing is, the churches are not equipping the believers to offset that.
Hmm.
The churches are actually pandering to it by saying, look, we just want to get along. We want to, this is how they phrase it, Gary. We want to continue our ministry, because we're doing good things, and we don't want to be held up by, a vaccination or a
Yeah.
lockdown. We're going to comply because we want to keep our ministry. That's what they have said in America. And it's baloney. It's nonsense. It's a compromise. So it's like a lot of these churches in America. I don't know about there where you're at, but in order to compromise, and the government used money,
Yeah.
and they bought them off. They gave them what we call PPP money, which was they would pay for their staffing to lock down and to
Yeah.
stay shut down. And so, out of fear of losing their jobs or losing their money, they took Caesar's money. And and Gary, I don't think it's going to change. I think what you're watching is 1939
Yeah.
global, where the churches are like, yeah, man, I'm going to go with Hitler because I don't want to lose my money and I don't want to lose my job. And there's a quote from Hitler, and I can't, I'm going off the top of my head right now saying this, but he said these stinking pastors in Germany will sell out their congregations and sell out their God for their measly paycheck. And Hitler was totally right. They did, about 80% of them. And if I use that historical analysis, well, the same thing's happening here. The churches and the pastors are selling the congregations out, and basically what's rising is a state-ran church
Hmm.
is what's happening. And
Yeah.
here's where it's going to go. You won't be able to function in your building if you don't comply with the state. So guys like you and me, if we're still around
Yeah.
and the rapture hasn't happened, we're going to have to go underground. We're going to have house churches because they're not going to let me use my building. I guarantee you
Mhm.
that.
Well, even if you go back, I think Ecclesiastes 3, when it says that nothing new, there's nothing new under the sun, there's nothing new under the
Yeah.
heavens. That's we see this strategy continually. You know, if we go back 168 BC, we see Antioch Epiphanes. We see the Hellenistic believers actually basically entice him in, and
Yeah.
I guess then that would go to, you know, if I were to look at that as a historical blueprint of what could happen when it comes to the time of the Great Tribulation, it could be a state run apostate church that kind of makes the, or gives the seal of approval, you know, for the Antichrist, you know, via the false prophet. And we're seeing that being built in front of us. And I kind of find it, I guess, a bit crazy. But do you think the fear element is being used in tandem, and this is something I would think, with biblical illiteracy? I am seeing so many people who, and so many churches who won't even look at prophecy, who won't look at eschatology, who won't look at the book of Revelation, who won't look at the book of Daniel, and then they're going, oh well, you're just, you know, a doomsday sayer. You're just crazy, and you're looking at all this and you're reading into it. Do you think that it's biblical illiteracy accompanied accompanied with fear that's actually causing this within the church?
Yeah, absolutely. And what does biblical literacy teach when you will have a third of the Bible that teaches eschatology, obviously, the study of
Hmm.
the end times and how it's supposed to go down. So what happens is eschatology confronts normalcy bias. It confronts uniformitarianism. That's the whole point of 2 Peter chapter 3 is to
Hmm.
eschatology is confronting that God can break in and change things immediately on a dime, like he did
Yeah.
with Noah
Yeah.
or the coming tribulation or the
Hmm.
rapture or whatever. And what's happened is these pastors and churches have been peddling uniformitarianism, that everything's okay, it's always been the same, don't worry, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
And here you and I come and saying, wait a second, all the signs are converging. You got Israel in place now. You have AI, you have digital currency, all this stuff is happening, and you and I are disrupting their little secure, cushy life that
Hmm.
their pastor has actually created for them.
Hmm.
Pastors in America have created a bubble that
Yeah.
nothing's happening, everything is fine. You're going to live your best life now. So here you and I come, and you and I are preaching prophecy, and we're disrupting their whole scenario, telling them this is what's happening, this is reality. And Gary, because of their lack of biblical literacy, and the lack of the training of the pastors and
Hmm.
excluding eschatology. I want you to I'll give you a stat. 98% of the churches in America, according to Lifeway research, do not preach eschatology at all.
Wow.
98%. So that means only 2% are talking eschatology whatsoever. Okay. That being the case, then it's a psychological dynamic. So if I think reality is going to continue to go uniformitarianism and there's not going to be any disruptions, and I hear eschatology coming from the Bible, my first reaction is, I don't want to hear that. That messes up my narrative. That messes up my retirement. That messes up
Hmm.
the kind of life I want to live. Because here's what I've learned: the warnings that Jesus gives about, like, he'll give like 5 parables about eschatology, and it's always this: he gives resources or stewardship to his servants, and then he goes away, and then he comes back suddenly. Okay,
Yeah.
there's like 5 parables like that. And
Hmm.
in each one of those parables, whatever the parables that you can find all of them in the Olivet Discourse, by the way, in each one of those parables, it's the same story.
Hmm.
The servants who are watchful keep working. The servants that don't watch get lazy, they start abusing the other servants, and they start acting worldly.
Yeah.
And then they're caught off guard when he shows up and he rebukes them, you wicked, lazy servant. It's the same scenario. And there's 5 of them like that. Okay.
Hmm.
So, what does it teach me? If I walk away from this, what it's his number one admonition is watch. Well, the only way you
Yeah.
can watch is to know eschatology. That's the only way you can watch and stay alert, stay serving, stay in fellowship with him. The minute you stop watching, in every one of the parables, the servant goes worldly.
Yeah.
He goes worldly every time. He becomes lazy, he doesn't work, and he becomes basically Laodicea. And in fact, the point, let me make another point, and I don't want to
Mhm.
belabor this, but Paul says that there's a special crown of righteousness given to those who love his appearing. Okay, it's a
Yeah.
specific crown for those who love eschatology and love to see
Mhm.
the return of the Messiah. And why is that? Because if I'm looking for the return of the Messiah, which very few people do, it actually creates righteous living in me,
Mhm.
because that's why it's called the crown of
Yeah.
righteousness. It's a total connection with those who watch, live righteously, and serve
Mhm.
properly. Those who don't live righteous, and they live a worldly life. And then the next phrase he goes into after talking about that crown, he contrasts himself with Demas,
Yeah.
and he says, Demas has abandoned me because he loves this world too much. And when you see this whole picture, you're like, oh my goodness, that's what's happening right in the world today. You
Mhm.
take eschatology out, you get a worldly believer
Yeah.
and you get a fearful believer. It's totally lined up. So, anyway, I started to belabor that, but
Oh no,
it's
no.
all connected, dude.
Yeah, that it really does, and it makes a lot of sense because if you're not watching, and if you're not, Ezekiel 33, we are to watch, otherwise the blood is on our hands. If you're not keeping watch, and then you enter into that worldly living, then you're going to be subject to the spirit of the age, and this is where
Yes.
the church gets pulled one direction or another, and we would have seen that over COVID. When the
Yes.
spirit of the that time was definitely fear, and then now we're seeing it arise in which, like you said earlier, the church seems to be split, starting to split, and anti-Semitism seems to be taking, I guess, a public domain that seems to be getting justified in certain realms, in certain places. And I find that really peculiar because you can't do that if you've got, I guess, a correct dispensational view of the Bible and eschatological outlook. Because I've had people turn around and say to me, well, they don't believe, and they're Christian, they don't believe in the existence of the state of Israel, and
Yeah.
they don't believe that there should be the existence of the state of Israel. And my term is right, take emotion out of it based on what you feel. How do you explain Ezekiel 38? How do you
Yeah.
explain Psalm 83? How do you explain um, half of like the book of Daniel, a lot, Ezekiel 38, 39, and continuing from there? How do you explain Joel 2 and 3? You
Yeah.
can't.
Right.
And that's biblical illiteracy. You just cannot do it. And do you think that this, like if COVID was a dividing line, a point of division within the church, do you think what has happened since October 7th will is one too, as in people
Yeah.
dividing across the line?
Yeah, Gary, absolutely. You're hitting the nail on the head again, man. You are tracking with all of us in the remnant. So after the COVID lockdowns, which I think was another dividing line,
Yeah.
obviously, and that did divide. I sat around. I was in Mexico, and we were doing a conference there, and I was sitting at dinner with Tom Hughes and Billy Crone, who
Mhm.
I preach a lot with
Yeah.
on our travels, and obviously came there, right?
Yeah.
So you got to meet them, and we were sitting in Mexico and saying, okay, if the rapture doesn't happen anytime soon, you think there's another dividing line coming? And without a doubt, all of us said, absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. That the church, God is going to reveal more about the church. And we
Hmm.
didn't know at the time what topic, but we knew, yeah, I have the gut. I still feel a gut instinct, a conviction from the Holy Spirit that there needs to be some more sifting of the wheat and the tares.
Yeah.
And we just didn't know what topic it would be. We
Yeah.
said, maybe it's the LGBT. Well, that's already happening. It's transgender. And then October 7th hit. And Gary, down to all of us, we knew, okay, that's the event. Because what happened after that was absolutely shocking.
Hmm.
Now, I already understand there's a portion of Christianity that's replacement theology
Yeah.
that spiritualizes the text about Israel and then gives the promises made to Israel to the church, which is a very satanic doctrine, no
Yeah.
doubt about it. I mean, the Catholic Church has it, and many Protestant Reformed churches have it. It's
Hmm.
sickening, okay? And
Yeah.
it leads to anti Semitism in church history. Okay, I already knew that, and I knew what side they would be on. The shocking part, Gary, was that many of the churches that are like us, dispensational, they understand the prophetic scenario, they understand the importance of Israel, that they went silent.
Yeah.
They went completely silent. And here's the other thing, guys, pastors that Tom and I and Billy knew, they used to invite us to their church to speak,
Hmm.
stopped inviting us.
Wow.
And they went totally silent on the whole issue with Israel. And I was sitting there, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. You have our eschatology, you know Israelology, and you're not replacement theology. What happened to you? And Gary, the only thing I could surmise, and Tom and Billy and everyone else that talked about this, was there was a spiritual thing of cowardness.
Yeah.
That these guys that knew this, look, man, Hamas slaughtered 1,200 people. They
Hmm.
put babies in the ovens. They
Yeah.
they decapitated. They raped women so bad they broke their pelvis. And
Hmm.
and and, and some of the things I saw, and I can't even describe to you what happened.
Hmm.
And they could not take a stand against Hamas. And I'm like, okay, this is the dividing line. This is it. And so the what I saw was the cowardness
Hmm.
became revealed because these guys know that if they speak out against Hamas, against the Palestinians,
Yeah.
and are pro-Israel, they're going to get a pushback from society. They're going to get a pushback from people in their own congregations, and so they stayed silent. And
Hmm.
so what I have seen is capital C cowardness was revealed.
Yeah.
Cowardness came out. And Gary, they're still that way. They're still silent. And I have people I talk to that drive to my church 4 hours to go
Hmm.
attend my church because they say the churches I was going to I thought were good, but their issue on Israel was non-existent. And Brandon, I'm done. I'm done
Hmm.
with these guys. So yeah, Gary, it's happening. The second division happened.
It seems to be a whittling down, and I wonder if there's a connection with it too. It's even within the ones that seem to be a kind of awake to the pandemic, and and still when it comes to Israel, this is where the cowardice sort of comes on the scene. And I
Yes.
wonder if there's also a connection with conspiracy theory. Now, I've been called a conspiracy theorist a lot. And I tell them I'm not. I'm a biblical realist. So when I see eschatology playing out in front of me, when I see the the, the prophecies of the Olivet Discourse sort of just in the headlines, then I'm not being a conspiracy theorist to call the words of Jesus as truth.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is I would have watched certain alternative news sources and different things and that, to get my information. But I noticed as soon as October 7th happened, conspiracy was equated as well, as in People saying that, well, this happened because there was other things happening from Israel just coming in and secret attacks and people being taken away and all of this rhetoric that just kind of had no foundation in evidence, no foundation in fact, and more importantly, because I've seen so many people who are confessing Christians adopt this, no foundation in the Bible. Zechariah 12, for instance, we know that Israel becomes a burdensome stone. And like I said, I know that there's individuals who believe that who are confessing Christians who don't believe the state of Israel should exist.
Yeah.
But how does it become a burdensome stone
Right.
without existing? And it kind
Right.
of just, I feel sometimes that you're living in cloud cuckoo land where nobody is making logical sense when it comes to it. And I think that it's heartbreaking. We had David Tal on before.
Oh yeah, David's a good guy. I know him very
Yeah.
well.
And we had Lee Brainard on last night and we were talking about Israel and so on. And
Yeah.
I guess that it just sort of it grieves my heart that people can view what happened on October 7th as in any way reasonable. When we had David Tal on, we were contacted by people in the local Jewish community who thanked us for having him on and for actually bringing this discussion out because
Good.
they had said that they were afraid to leave the house.
Yeah.
And I never thought, like my bachelor's degree's in modern history.
Uh-huh.
So it covers World War One, World War Two. It covers the Russian revolutions and so on. But I never thought I would live in a time that would, I guess, equate to 1933. That it would equate to that sort of anti-Semitic atmosphere. And I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, are you experiencing it within the church? Have you experienced it within the church? Have you experienced it? Um, is it just with other churches?
I haven't experienced it in our church because people know if they come to Rock Harbor. I mean, we're flying the Israeli flag and we're
Yeah.
supporting the IDF, and so you're you're going to get hit with a big dose of pro-Israel stances. So they won't last long in our church. But I will say this: in the community, the Christian community where I live in, and all of California, it's the same thing.
Hmm.
Silence, or if they're not silent, they're you're right. They're taking the conspiracy theories that, well, Israel wanted this, Israel actually set this thing up,
Hmm.
and it's the same kind of nonsense that they keep peddling that they have no basis in reality of saying. Just like they said the Jews hit our World Trade Centers, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's what Louis Farrakhan said.
Oh.
And so they keep saying that, well, Netanyahu knew, and so he set this up. It's like, oh my goodness. So you have that aspect, which I think is like blood libels when they say
Hmm.
things like that. That's just crazy talk. But um, what I have noticed is, and you mentioned it earlier in the show, biblical illiteracy on Israelology reigns supreme. I
Hmm.
mean, if you bring those passages up, but the land covenant, the Davidic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, it's like these are unilateral covenants. When did that ever get fulfilled? They won't be until the Messianic kingdom.
Yeah.
They look at you like a calf at a new gate. They have no idea what are you talking about. It's just
Yeah.
they're out of it, man. And so my concern is that you see this worldwide anti-Semitism, and I think the veil has been lifted off. That
Yeah.
the undercurrent is everywhere, especially among millennials and Gen Z, and because
Hmm.
of the colleges. And there's a reason for that I can get into, but let me stay on the spiritual aspect. So you have the whole culture doing that, and so the fear factor in the church is, well, I better go along with the culture, and that fear factor keeps the silence, but also keeps the conspiracy theories alive and well.
Yeah.
And so what we have experienced is that, and we've also experienced a little bit of pushback from the community. There's no doubt about that. We've had our signs desecrated. They've spray painted our digital sign saying "Hate Israel" and yada yada yada. Not too bad, but we've got some
Mhm.
pushback. We have signs for people in their yards that we put out, and a lot of those got trashed that people put out. And I think what it revealed is the global anti-Semitism, but the fact that the church is not going to rally unless the remnant, they're not going to rally to Israel's side. They're actually going to let this happen, just like they did in Germany, just
Hmm.
like they did in Russia. They're just going to let it happen. I don't want to get involved. It's none of my business. And I want to say, dude, you're next.
Yeah.
Uh, they take the Jews first. They're going to take out the Christians next. The Saturday people will go first, and then the Sunday people. And it's like, and this is the thing. They think like in Nazi Germany that they can avoid persecution by being neutral about
Hmm.
Israel. And you can't. God doesn't even give you that choice to be neutral. You either for him or you're against him. That's it. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians are finding themselves on the wrong side of this issue.
What I find fascinating is I'm a little bit of a geek, right? So, you know, I remember years ago reading through the Quran, and I did so purely because when I before I was a pastor, I had a love for apologetics, and I was reading through the Quran, and the term "children of Israel" is consistent. Like, it's a few dozen times, and it mentions children of Israel in connection with the land, and nowhere in the Quran does it mention Palestine in connection with the land, because there's no Palestine. There's no acceptance of a Palestinian state. There's no acceptance of a Palestinian people, even in the Quran itself. And it's a
Yeah.
ludicrous argument that I'm seeing sort of pushed and propagated out there. And I know I'm aware of your time, and like, thank you for coming on. But um, can I ask one more question, if that's
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely. Go for it, man.
Yeah. Um, I'm aware that in 1871, Albert Pike, the
Yeah.
Freemason
Yeah.
and Satanist, had his letters were recovered, and his letters to another individual, and they detail three world wars. The First World War, he was able to detail about coming against the Tsars of Russia. The Second World War, talking about Nazism even before the term was, I guess, in use. And the Third World War, he says in his letters that it comes off the back of, I guess, conflict between the Islamic world and again, the children of Israel.
Mm.
Um, do you think, based on that, and I'm not equating him as anything other than a satanic prophet, if anything, but do you think, based on that, that part of what's happening here, there is a satanic agenda at play to try and, I guess, stoke conflict? Now, we know that there's going to be a biblical, and this is biblical, this is going in the version of Zechariah 12, but do you
Yeah.
think that there's a satanic agenda to bring in this conflict?
Um, Without a doubt, because what you have to understand from the satanic realm, if you study demonology or Satanology in Scripture, what you start realizing is they're very intelligent creatures. They're far more intelligent than you and I as human beings.
Mhm.
And even though they're in a fallen state,
Yeah.
they didn't take away their intelligence. And this is why they can. The way let me back up a little bit. The way Satan was created and the way demons or fallen angels are created, they had a superior intellect and knowledge that was given to
Hmm.
them. So when they sinned with full knowledge of what they were
Yeah.
doing. They weren't in ignorance. That gives them the capability, way more than you and I, to look at trends about what's going on and have a better prediction, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
a better trend line than you and I, because they can put the pieces of the puzzle together. They can read things better than you and I can. Now, without the word of God, you and I would be totally lost. So they can see the trend lines of what God's doing in the world. And I can tell you this, based on what I see as far as demonic activity, these guys know that God is up to something, and they
Hmm.
realize their time is drawing near and drawing short. And so I think, if you reference Pike or Alice Bailey or any of
Yeah.
the other people that were, practicing necromancy. I mean, think about this. I mean, and let me draw this out just a little bit. One of these necromancers that have that, obviously channeling demons. One of the things that the demons said is that there's going to be a great evacuation of the planet of about 2 billion people.
Hmm.
And don't be alarmed. That's the aliens taking them to the spaceship. That they need to be re-educated because they were preventing Mother Earth from accomplishing her next level of spirituality, and they're holding all of us back. And
Hmm.
also, don't be alarmed when the children disappear. They're going to be taken to a different planet, and they're going to populate that planet.
Yeah.
Now, I know that sounds crazy, but this is what one of the necromancers, this is in Chuck Missler's book that he published called, I think, Alien Invasion,
Yeah.
that these are what the demons were saying. And obviously, anybody with any common sense and biblical literacy could say, oh, they're making up a narrative about the rapture. Uh,
Hmm.
and so when you reference that, I don't put that out of the realm of them understanding what's getting ready to happen and go down. Okay, so you're totally right on target on that. Now we don't build anything off of that, but we understand that the demonic's setting things up.
Hmm.
No doubt. The key for them is Israel as well. The key for them is the fact that Satan must eliminate Israel. And
Hmm.
the reason why is because of the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the land covenant, and the new
Yeah.
covenant. Because those promises made to them must come to fruition. Otherwise, Satan can call God a liar and can say, on a technicality, you can't judge me. You're calling me a liar, but you're a liar because you didn't keep your promises to Israel.
Hmm.
Second, what people have to understand about Israel. The second coming, not the rapture, but the second coming is predicated on Israel's acceptance of the Messiah.
Yeah.
You shall not see me again until you learn to say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." That is predicated, and then the calling out, the repentance of Isaiah 53 must occur in Israel for the
Hmm.
second coming to happen. So Satan's playing a game with God. If he can eliminate Israel, can eliminate the promises, and eliminate the second coming of the Messiah and the setting up of the Messianic kingdom.
Yeah.
So we would have to, as a Bible study person, totally understand that this is demonic, that
Hmm.
their spirit of lawlessness is setting Israel up to be in the vice grip, to be destroyed by the Antichrist. That's really the intent, is to the total destruction. So this global worldwide anti-Semitism that we're seeing, it is answered only by a spiritual answer,
Yeah.
that Satan is drawing this up to destroy Israel during the tribulation. And we already know the rest of the story. He's not going to be able to do
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
that explains this anti-Semitism, and it explains the anti-Semitism in the church. That
Hmm.
everything is coming against Israel. So my goodness, Gary, these pastors who are taking an anti-Israel stance are useful idiots for Satan.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to them.
Do you think the rhetoric right now that is being pushed of from a lot of governments, including the government over here, and by the way, our first minister here said that Hamas will be a future peace partner. Now, yeah, um, it's
Wow.
I feel like I'm living in a yeah, anyway. But do you think that this is a push with the idea of pushing on Israel, a Palestinian state, and a two-state solution? Do you think this is setting the scene for Daniel 9?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, these people are crazy, wanting a two-state solution, and even the United States has come out and said we're going to have a two-state solution unilaterally, and
Yeah.
and they said that regardless of what Netanyahu said, because Netanyahu
Yeah.
and 75% of the Jewish population saying not happening. We're not
Mhm.
ever doing a Jewish state. So what's happening is the United States has Israel over a barrel because the United States supplies weapons and money to Israel. So they're saying you're going to do what we tell you to do, or else. And Israel's like, no, we're not. So I think what we're getting ready to see is the separation between the United States and Israel. But anyway, you're absolutely right. This is leading into them falling into the hands of a peace treaty with the Antichrist. Because look, if Israel loses its partner, the United States, and saying we're
Mhm.
not going to do what you want us to do, because the United States is a pro Palestinian policy and a pro-Iranian policy, and Israel's not going to destroy themselves. That they're going to say, look,
Yeah.
your policy is destroying us. We're not going to comply. Sorry, we're going to break fellowship.
Hmm.
And I think when you start seeing that, again, this is going to, Zechariah chapter 12, the burdensome stone, but the isolation
Yeah.
of Israel alone puts her in a position to where she will need defense and protection because Israel doesn't make its own weapons.
Yeah.
And if it's going to fight Hezbollah, if it's going to fight Iran, it needs weapons and it needs protection. So, man, I'm telling you what, Gary, the problem that the United States and Israel are having is going to send Israel, I think, into the hands of the Antichrist in the future.
Yeah.
And because they are not going to allow another Palestinian state ever again after October 7th. And
Yeah.
then I already know this because I work right in tandem with the IDF. I have several guys I'm in contact with, commanders of IDF units.
Hmm.
I already know the next move. The next move is they have to take out Hezbollah, and they already are geared up
Yeah.
to take Hezbollah out once they deal with Hamas. Well, the United States has already said you will not start a war with Hezbollah.
Hmm.
So then what's Israel going to do? And I think Israel's eventually going to act unilaterally, and they're going to say, "Bye bye, America. We're
Yeah.
going to take care of Hezbollah."
Yeah.
So it's sending Israel though into the hands of the Antichrist, Gary. And then it's like,
Um,
man, you couldn't draw this up any clearer than what Scripture is saying. I mean, it is so. Otherwise, if you looked at this, it would be like chaos,
mhm.
just total chaos. But it actually is falling right in place.
And I want to shake other pastors and churches and say, wake up. Because I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you a question, and this is probably the last one because I'm really aware of your time. Um, I'd asked Pete Garcia this, I'd asked Lee Brainerd, this is just recently, and both Pete and Lee believe that we're in a rapture window sort of area right now. And I don't believe in date setting, and I'm not asking you to date set, but do you believe, how imminent is it, the doctrine of imminency?
How
How,
imminent? It's
yeah,
imminent.
how close do you think we are?
Well, here's my thing: we're in. This is how far I'm going to say. We're in the season of it. There's no doubt about that. I believe we're in the last days from a theological standpoint. We've been in the last days since World War One, actually, and
Mhm.
that's because of the Jewish idiom of "nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom," as the sign for that the last days have begun.
Mhm.
So we're in the last days. We're in the season, and here's the thing: I remember Dr. Walford saying to us, we had him one time when I was at Liberty. He wasn't a Liberty professor, but they actually brought Dr. Walford in as a guest lecturer to our eschatology class at Liberty. And of course, he was from Dallas Theological Seminary. And I got the privilege to hear Dr. Walford one on one about this. And he says, look, man, there are things that are going on that have an end date.
Mhm.
And he was saying based on like whether it's oil, whether it's technology, whether it's all these other things that they're developing. At a certain point, um, you cross lines with these other converging factors,
Yeah.
and you don't return back. You're like in the window, as like you pointed out.
Mhm.
And what I think now, and that was Gary, that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, I think now more than ever, there are things happening that if they go any further, they will destroy all of humanity.
Yeah.
For instance, the transhumanism movement of messing with human DNA, right? I think if you go any further with that, you're really going to start having problems. I mean, can they create a creature, a chimera? They already
Mhm.
are,
Yeah.
or some type of hybrid human. You know what I mean? What does it mean to be human? And then at the same time, you have AI that could actually get out of control. So you have that going on, and then several other things that with the issue of oil.
Mm-hmm.
and energy, which is a major issue of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm using Dr. Walvoord, and if anyone's interested, he wrote about this in Oil, Armageddon, and the Middle East by
Okay.
John Walvoord, and he talked about what's making the Middle East so powerful is oil.
Mm-hmm.
But if they didn't have oil, they wouldn't be the power brokers that they are today. So you're in the window in which the Middle East is powerful because of oil.
Yeah.
And so, taking those factors in, we're definitely in the season and the window in which that if you went any further, the Middle East is not going to be powerful anymore. AI would take over, or transhuman would happen, and I don't think God's going to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think it gives us this period of time that this is when it's going to go down, because God has to pull the trigger on other things.
Mm-hmm.
Look, when they start messing with children, I already know he ain't gonna put up with that.
Yeah.
With the transgender movement, the pedophilia movement, all this other junk. When they get into starving humans and all these other factors of reducing the population and just mass murdering people
Mm-hmm.
through vaccinations or whatever, starvation, I, God acts. I usually
Yeah.
see in the pattern in Scripture that He will act, and we're at that tipping point now that they're doing things in our society that says you're going to force God to act, and I think we're in that window. So that's my explanation, my friend.
I appreciate that. Can I ask you just to finish on a word of encouragement for
Yeah,
for those who are weary, because it is true. We do know the time, we do know the season that we're in, and our eyes are trained, waiting for His return, and we're busy about kingdom work. But I
yeah,
am aware that some people are weary in the process.
yeah. Well, I know many of you out there because I talk to you and you tell me about the weariness and the the spiritual uh, the downing, people feel spiritually down because it's such dark stuff, and
Hmm.
they feel down and depressed and anxiety ridden. But here's the thing, man: you are called for such a time as this. You were made for this period of time, so don't put the white flag up and surrender. You get about your father's business. You use your gifts and talents that he has given you because we need you to make a final stand for righteousness, for truth. We need you to stand in the gap. We need you to stand on the wall and warn people. Now, here's the thing: they may not listen to you, but what does Ezekiel say? You're a watcher on the wall. I will hold you accountable for their blood if you don't warn them. So we got a job to do, guys, and we need all of you in the trenches.
Hmm.
I can't do it alone. Gary can't do it alone. We need everybody doing their job,
Amen.
whether that's speaking to your family, your neighbors, your friends, whatever. We need you. So don't go AWOL on us, man. Get in the trenches. Let's fight all the way so that when you guys stand and we stand before the Lord and he's evaluating us at the Bema seat, he will say to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So
Amen.
don't ever forget that, guys. We need you fighting.
Amen. Thank you so much, Brandon. I really appreciate this. I'm going to end this broadcast now, but you'll still be on just for a second. So
Okay.
I'll just end this. Thank you so much. And I'm sure everybody, um, I'm sure there's so much information in tonight. It's so much. We've covered quite a spectrum
We did.
of subjects. I'll just end this now.